If you think about why an association happens, it happens because a group of people get together to fill a need, a gap, right?
I guess all nonprofits are mission driven. So everything that you do has to be about advancing that mission.
I prefer to be answerable to membership than ownership.
One of the biggest things that we have to offer is our membership have got incredible experience, and that isn't valueless. That's why I think in professional services particularly, you see the need for associations. I think the IALD has not always been the most accessible organization. It has for many years felt like a kind of a fortress, which has been both a strength and a weakness. And I think the opportunity there has been for us to grapple with some conversations that we've struggled with for probably 20 years, this whole independence thing and the definition of what does independence mean about. And that was a huge discussion to have, even internally. Like that was a really challenging conversation. And we've come through the other side of that saying, no, we really do think we need to be a broader, more open-minded organization.
And I think that really kind of boils it down. You know, we are able to focus on our mission.
Welcome to the Light Pod, built by Light-Eye. It's the #1 podcast for thought-provoking and inspirational conversations when it comes to the people, the process, and the product of design, all with a little love for lighting along the way. I'm your host, Sam Corbel, and we're lucky enough to welcome Christopher Knowlton and Andrea Harntreff to the podcast studio. We're going to dive a little bit into the value and the power of a nonprofit in a professional environment, specifically what it can do for design and lighting design. This conversation is made possible thanks to our partner, Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale creates luminaires that go beyond expectations in healthcare environments, focusing on the people and well-being, not just spaces or treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's impact and you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Now let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Andrea is the current president of the IALD and is a seasoned lighting expert with over 1,000 projects under her belt. 1,000, that's impressive.
Sure.
She's earned international recognition on her energy efficient and high-end spaces, making her a true leader in the field. Christopher was a lighting designer and has turned to be the leader of the IALD. He's passionate about nurturing the lighting design community and driving change through transformational leadership. Christopher and Andrea, welcome to your podcast at your conference, Enlighten Americas in San Diego. The year is 2024. Are you excited about what's going to happen over the next 4 days?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, we look forward to these conferences. We get to be face to face with the people that love what we love and love to talk about what we love to talk about. It's great fun.
I think the one thing that I have, having been an attendee and now being partially responsible for it, I mean, the team do all the work and I just turn up at the end and go, great. But it's really an opportunity for people to kind of step away from work and be thinking about what they do, but in a more reflective kind of way. And that space, I think, is really becoming more and more in demand as life becomes more and more busy and we're working in different time zones, etc. It's super exciting to have that.
I think, something that I really treasure about these conferences or these in-person things is, you spend the day learning and you spend the night really learning, like networking and talking just off the cuff with, like I said, with people who want to talk about the same stuff. I mean, this is our community. These next few days, all of the things that are in my head at the end of the day can come out of my head and, be met with similar thoughts and conversations can continue.
I want to take just a step back. When you look at nonprofits, they bridge the gap, right, between creativity, social impact, and serving a specific community. There's something that the IALD has created that's been formed, as well as many other nonprofits. When you look at what the value and what the reason is for a nonprofit, why do you think they matter so much in businesses that are surrounded by professional services?
From a purely structural perspective, a nonprofit or a not-for-profit, there is a slightly, depending on who you talk to, there's a slightly different definition of those two things. But essentially, they're structured so that there is no shareholders. So any money that is created is not distributed to people who are making a particular gain. I guess all nonprofits are mission driven. So everything that you do has to be about advancing that mission. And it's a subtle but important difference that if you have a company that is a for-profit, ultimately there is someone who is able to extract the benefit from that in a financial sense through the ownership structure. So nonprofits have an important role because it also communicates instantly to other people that this organization and all of its resources are set up to further that particular mission. And so it means that when you go into conversations with regulators or public bodies or any of the other kind of interested stakeholders, you know that that group is working without some kind of commercial driver behind it. There's no kind of way of accessing that for personal gain, essentially. I mean, of course, you have to be set up properly. You have to have the correct governance structures in place.
I prefer to be answerable to membership than ownership. And I think that really kind of boils it down. You know, we are able to focus on our mission.
It also allows people to participate in a way that if you are trying to influence public policy, for example, having an organizational structure where you can take the views of many and then represent those is significantly stronger than often a single organization saying, we're a for-profit, this is what we do, and this is why we think you should do this. It's very difficult in public life to take that and really run with it often. So nonprofits are also a way of bringing together multiple perspectives and then allowing them to be put to regulators and others. And that kind of is a unique part. And that's why I think in professional services particularly, you see the need for associations as a vehicle for interfacing with other organizations and governmental bodies.
When you look at the landscape of nonprofits in design, there's some pretty big ones. The AIA, probably namely the biggest one. How many nonprofits do you think live in that design and professional services space today versus how many are known past the AIA?
There is a huge number. Yeah.
Too many. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, even within lighting, there's a lot.
But it's funny because I was having a conversation with somebody this morning about how much work it was to start an association from scratch. And I know how many moving parts and pieces there are that are constantly having to keep up with all the changes that are happening. I don't think it's so easy to start an association or to maintain and grow an association.
It's maintain and grow, I think, is the, and also there is a sense of longevity, is a security for people knowing that if they've been around for a long time, they've been managed well. That gives you confidence that they know what they're doing. But it is, it's a scalable thing. Like if you've got a nonprofit that's really small, then the IRS is very kind and they let you file reduced tax filings and things. So it's not meant to be prohibitively difficult, but I think that the growing, and particularly in the membership model, so IALD is a C6 corporation, which means that it must have members, and therefore growing membership and maintaining membership is, you know, a key part of operating our entity. I'm not sure that it is that easy.
Well, it's no different than saying, well, to have your own firm, all you need to do is file your LLC papers, which is true. You know, anybody can have a business. It's that next step that's a little bit bigger.
As you're explaining, you need to have membership in order to be a viable nonprofit under the current structure. Are most nonprofits in the professional services world set up in a similar fashion where it's driven by membership?
The IRS has a whole series of categorizations for nonprofits. And this is where I mentioned earlier, nonprofit and not-for-profit are sometimes separated. So the IALD Education Trust is a C3, and that's what I would classify as a nonprofit charitable organization. They essentially receive money and then use that money to further their mission. The IALD is a C6, which is for specifically membership organizations. And so there are some different requirements there that you must have members. Members must vote on certain things, whereas in a C3, you don't need that. I think the list is 12 or 14 different categories, and that's just in North America. Step outside of North America and the system is entirely different again. There is relative harmonization, but each country is slightly unique, which, helpfully, if you want to try and do anything there.
There's different values, different reasons, different rhymes to all of it. This organization, the ILD, and there's the IES in lighting, there's WILD, which is in lighting.
Well, there's a number of DER related.
Then there's also the institutions that are sort of spawned from IES. So SIBSE, which is the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, have the Society of Light and Lighting. It's really an acronym soup, but that used to be IES like right back in the 1900s, I think. And then there was some agreement that they would split. And there's the Institute of Lighting Professionals. You've got other organizations like Dark Sky International who are kind of getting involved in lighting, equity in lighting.
Yeah. National Lighting Bureau.
National Lighting Bureau.
There's on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is every single one of these is set up with a mission, with something that they are going to provide to the members. When you think about the members, arguably people have different interests, but they also have common interests. So people sign up not for one, but for multiple membership slots, if you will, which by the way is not capped, correct? As a person, you can go sign up for as many as you want. And typically as a nonprofit organization set up in the way the ILD is, you'll take as many members under the criteria that has been set forth, correct? How do they learn to coexist, right? There's the design group that says this is what we do. And then there's and it may not even be design, but like for the sake of this conversation, it's design and lighting. Is there, you do this, I do that? Break down for me how these two things look at each other.
If you think about why an association happens, it happens because a group of people get together to fill a need, a gap, right? Each time there's an apparent gap, you get another association, committee, whatever it's going to be. I think then the question starts to become, okay, when do we run out of gaps? Well, probably never. But how do we make an association or organization that can become an umbrella to sort of be a place where all these gap fillers can coexist? But I think, all of it's just well and good until you get to the part where everybody is kind of vying for the same pot of sponsorship opportunity. Whether that's money, whether that's time, whatever that is, and even volunteer time. I mean, people can only do so much, give so much. And I think that's where it becomes harder.
I want to come back to the business of nonprofits 100%, right? Like, as you mentioned, one of you is paid, one of you is not, right? Christopher, you're the CEO. It's a paid position. Andrea, yours is volunteer. There is a very small staff. Nonprofits rely on membership, as you mentioned earlier, but a large part to sponsorship. Like I said, let's come back to that because it's a really important thing to discuss. The important thing to understand is everybody is going to the same well to try and fund all these. And we're not alone in the lighting world. It happens across the board. And typically there's this like preconceived notion of who should be funding the nonprofits.
Well, the hope is that it's a symbiotic relationship. Like they see value in promoting the association and the members within. And, we try to provide value to them with access to members and all of that.
The term that I keep using is partnerships of value. A donation is different than sponsorship in my mind. Sponsorship is about long-term, valuable relationships formed between two partners who are achieving something. And that is an important differentiation, because donations really don't have that same.
Yeah, that's just
you're putting money into a pot to do good.
Correct.
But it's a very different thing, and it's also a different tax thing. But it's really getting down to, as an organization, we want to create a space where everyone is welcome, everyone has a place. And how do we both create that and create the opportunities? I mean, I think the IALD has not always been the most accessible organization. It has, for many years, felt like a kind of a fortress, which has been both a strength and a weakness. It's led to incredibly strong governance. It got us through the pandemic.
That can be, quite simply put, a turnoff, not intentionally. Right? It's a total unintentional consequence, but it's a very real consequence of saying this is what you have to do in order to be a part of that. So can you talk just a little bit more about what it means to try to find that balance within an organization?
I think we've just done that. I think the bylaws change has really helped with that.
Not everything in the pandemic was great. There was a lot of bad things. Like, it really, it always, it's a sort of personal, uncomfortable thing about talking about positive things from when so many people died. I mean, that's always hard. But the reality is that it gave us an opportunity to break down the walls of what were assumed to just exist. And that was the status quo. No one really wanted to change it. That was kind of how things were. And I think the opportunity there has been for us to grapple with some conversations that we've struggled with for probably 20 years, this whole independence thing and the definition of what does independence mean, about how lighting designers make fees and don't take money from anything else. And that was a huge discussion to have, even internally. Like, that was a really challenging conversation. And we've come through the other side of that saying, no, we really do think we need to be a broader, more open-minded organization. We need to be more accessible. That doesn't work around the world. I think it's really like the I in IALD is international. Mm-hmm. And I really don't think that we can stress how the nuance in that is so deep. You go to any of these different countries and the way in which they operate, the way in which business models operate is just so different that we should be a place where you can come, you can get education, you can network, you can have a place to be and exist. And I think that this goes back to the fragmentation thing, which is we haven't always allowed that space. Right. And so not only to what Andrea was saying was that, like, these voids or these spaces, we've unintentionally, I would like to think, left these spaces where people feel the need to go and do something else. And that's sort of sad, because really it would be great if everyone was in one boat rowing in the same direction. And that's not a criticism to them. I mean, it's more a criticism to us, which is, I think that I would love to see a time when we had less groups because people felt more at home. I understand that that's not how they feel, and we're working to try and address that. And whether we then end up coming together is maybe a different question, I mean, for all of us. But I do think that we have failed a little bit in that respect to create that space. And that's why we're playing catch up. And I think that particularly on like a DEIR front, we've been very open about that. We've not had no success. We've had a split board, 50-50 male and female. It's been international. So I don't take the criticism that we've done nothing, but there is so much more that we can do. Like this year, we've started the process of forming a DEIR committee that will sit on the board. They will also interface with all the other committees and organizations. So change is incremental, but it is happening. And it's probably happening now at a faster rate with significantly less staff than we've ever had. So don't speak to my team this week. They're probably quite tired.
When I was first learning about the IALD, that was some of the first language that I heard was, oh, it's an elite club, it's this, it's that. It didn't keep me from joining, but it did sort of color what my expectations were. I think that the bylaws changes are a great step to making the IALD much more accessible to anybody to join. That doesn't mean that we give up the ability to be, at the highest level, doing our work at the highest level, and there's differentiation within the membership to allow for that. I mean, I still think that's really critical. I've had in the last year's discussions, I've had people say, well, I've sort of staked my claim on being an independent lighting designer, and now what do I say? And when I first heard that, it took me a second, because I just hadn't had that question asked to me before, and I'm not as fast a thinker as everybody. But what I would say is it's still a great thing, as is every other business model that lets you do your job at a really high level. I feel like we've been able to now cut through the weeds of all of that and now focus on the thing that we're supposed to be focusing on. And it's not like I haven't said this a million times before, but that's responsible lighting design and high quality. So, if the goal is to make the world better through the power of light, then that's what our job is, and how we get there. We do have a standard of ethics, but it doesn't have to necessarily involve how we make our money.
When you look at the delineation of who's been admitted to the association in the past versus who is now, as you mentioned, there's been a bylaws change that is, we'll just table that conversation of what it takes to change bylaws for another time. But we'll all agree, like, there's a tremendous amount of work for the very specific reason that we spoke about earlier, which is when the organization is set up, there is some work that goes into it. It does have to be defined. And those are decisions that have to be made. We talked a little bit earlier about coexisting, and Andrea said, that can feel combative. I think what's interesting there is nonprofits and businesses are one and the same, in that you can't just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you have unlimited resources. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean, if we serve this population, we'll just go ahead and go do everything for you, right? You have to stay focused. You have to be able to measure the impact that you're making, in this case, not for profit, but for your membership, and then continue to improve it. There creates an opportunity there for a hell of a lot of criticism. The IALD has well over 1,000 members, which you serve, which is a lot of voices coming back at you. And I'm willing to bet, I'm going to go with my life on, they don't all think the same way.
Good call.
Right? Do I get to keep my life?
You're safe.
Okay, sweet. I can keep my life. So you've got all kinds of people out there with a bunch of vision and driven mission, powerful approaches to what they do. Yet they all turn to you and say, well, this is what I need. How does a nonprofit, what can a nonprofit do to help people understand, well, just because you're a member doesn't mean we just do everything you want. Like, we're working too here.
That's why you need a mission. And you need to understand why you have that mission, and you need to stay focused.
So when you look at the mission of the IALD versus all the other nonprofits in the industry, what do you do with a mission in order to keep it broad yet focused?
I think it's really very similar for all organizations, which is that the strategy is rarely disagreeable. I mean, unless you're in a political side of the nonprofit sphere. And most of the lighting industry, if you really look at them, they're very similar. So then you get into the tactics of how you're going to do it. So we want to advance the profession of lighting design. I don't think anyone has a problem with that as a mission. How are you going to do it is where there is a lot of discussion and a lot of opinions about what that looks like. And that's where we have to use our board of directors and we have kind of got into a 5-year planning cycle. So it's like we're going to set out the strategy, and then we're going to work out what we're doing through tactics to make that a reality and move another step towards meeting the mission. I mean, if you had unlimited resources and unlimited time, you could do it all. The reality is we can't. We have a budget, we have a number of human resources, we have a number of volunteer hours. So then it becomes the really difficult job for the board, which is to basically say, okay, now we're going to prioritize this, this, and this. And that's a very difficult thing to communicate, because the thought process that goes into that is very detailed. It takes into account a lot of information. And so then you have to try and communicate to other people why you're doing what you're doing, in what order you're doing it in. And, we've really experienced this. We've had probably the most fundamental change in IALD's leadership and structure that it's ever had, probably. Certainly the bylaws changes is the most significant that have happened in the last 50 years. And there's been a lot of other things that we've had to do. And they're so boring. We've replaced the database. And you think, God, that's that's the least sexy thing ever. And it takes so much work. But now when someone says something like, is that person a member? I can tell you yes or no. And I can also see that when people register for the conference, we start to be able to build a more sophisticated understanding of who our members are, understand what they're doing, what do they want. It offers us opportunities to find new members, because you see the people who are either former members or non-members who signed up. This stuff is so boring, and in the commercial world is so normal. This is such a marketing and sales tactic, but without the infrastructure, it's impossible. So unless you can start tying all of the people who sign into your website via an ID together, you've got no chance. It's that stuff which, the last 2 years have been full of all the unsexy, infrastructure things that we've needed to do. But now, if I go to Andrea's profile, I can tell you what her last email she received from us was, whether she opened it, what events she's registered for. And so our level of service is able to go up from this point, because we now have that information. But from there, it then makes us more efficient. And we're a team of 5-6 people. That efficiency will start to show now, because we're not spending time doing really stupid admin tasks. And that is where I'm sort of excited, because next year, those things, you start to be able to become more efficient. And then we start to work on more time is being put into the mission rather than foundational things.
Well, and starting to be able to do the sexy things, looking at the website, the public facing part of the website, looking at the branding, looking at all the things that we want to get done, but couldn't get done until the baseline stuff got taken care of.
We're looking after our membership, and there's a sort of an external part of that, which is outreach for new members. Then there's also the part of how do we promote the profession? We need to be out telling people why lighting design is great and why it's important. That infrastructure then provides the platform from which we can go and implement that stuff. And that's where we then start to get into increasing member value.
This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale develops luminaires that deliver beyond the usual expectation of what they should do in healthcare environments. As an expert medical brand, they make lighting about people, not just spaces, about feeling well, not just treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's positive impact on people, you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, and you also want to share your thoughts about the future of lighting, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. That's ultimately what most nonprofits in the professional services world strive to achieve, is creating value for their members. We talked a little bit earlier about how there's a lot of members. We also talked a little bit earlier about how those members pay a fixed fee, yet what they get is potentially variable in return based on whether what the organization is doing does or does not benefit them in that specific certain time. So there has to be donations and there has to be sponsorships on top of it. Let's talk about where that comes from. For the sake of this conversation, we can pick on lighting and we can pick on where everybody goes, which is manufacturers. Manufacturers arguably are the staple, because if we don't have anything to put in buildings, what good is any of it? However, I would argue the design community is equally as important, because if we have stuff but we don't know how to use it, well, then we're also in trouble. They need to coexist. Somehow, some way, the nonprofit becomes a bridge for both to exist. I know the IALD has the LIRC, which is a manufacturing component, which is an opportunity for you at a professional level to engage with each other, but in the nonprofit space. Those LIRC members pay a fee. They get access to your organization and its members in a specific way. Boom, value right there. You might argue that's one of the most valuable parts of the IALD in the current setup of the organization. However, as you look to the future, how are you going to evaluate what you want to do, right? How are you going to let this organization evolve so that you can listen to the screaming voices and tell the screaming voices, hey, we love you, P.S., this is what's up?
Well, we've started that process. Our last, our this last year of board work that we've been doing has been strategic planning. Identifying all of the areas, all the sectors where we need to better support or we need to prioritize, and prioritizing so that we have a roadmap for the next 5+ years. And I don't think you really want to look too much farther than 5 years, because so much changes in a couple of years even that, every few years you've got to reevaluate where you are, whether you've met your goals, like where you are and what you have to do to keep going forward. But we've really done a lot of work in the last year to be able to understand now how to put money towards the things we need to do.
And money's a key word, because you need that money and you've got to go fundraise that. What's the conversation that needs to be had? What do people need to understand about every specific organization and the value they have, and therefore the money that, you're entitled to or deserve or demand or need?
I don't know that manufacturers are quite that selfless, that I think they establish a budget of what they're willing to give, and that marketing, or whatever you want to call that budget, is based on an understanding that there is a value that is achieved by sponsoring, the associations that they choose to sponsor.
I'm going to divide the question from to this day and then in the future. And I'll speak for IALD specifically, and then I'll talk generically about others. So the IALD has typically represented specifiers. Specifiers are a group of people that spend often a long time, working on a project and essentially saying, trust me, this is going to look great, but you're not going to see the results of my work for many years. So it's a very difficult sell in the specification space to say, trust me with something that you won't see until the building is there. And it's really hard to tell you what it's actually going to feel like, not look like, but how you will feel in that space. So there is a trust relationship built by specifiers and their clients. To sell to a specifier, you also need a relationship of trust. That relationship of trust is built by an interaction and a communication. So typically what we find is the people that are sponsoring ILD events are those that want to have meaningful long-term connections with specifiers, because specifiers do not like people who change company every week, who they can't rely on, because when they want something or need something, they need to know that there's a trust relationship, right? And it takes time to build that. So there is a transactional relationship there, which is if you sponsor those events and you start to build those relationships and maintain them, that leads to your product ending up on projects, right?
It also communicates that you believe in the association.
Yeah.
That you see them as credible and you're willing to invest in their success. And as a specifier, that, manufacturers that support the IALD, that are LIRC members, that year over year are investing in the success of the IALD. For me, that's a slam dunk when I'm thinking about who I'm specifying.
Andrea, you mentioned earlier budget. Manufacturers have an allocated budget of sponsorship. A manufacturer has a choice to spend $1 to develop a new product or sponsor an organization. How does the true value go past just the trust?
You have to spend both dollars. Clearly, You're not going to survive as a manufacturer if you don't spend the time developing new product. But you also have to spend that dollar to be in the room with the people who are going to use the product. Because that symbiotic relationship that Christopher was talking about, we have manufacturers that come to us, as do every other reputable lighting design firm, and say, look at this. What do you think? What do you need? How do we make it better? All of the things they get value from access to specifiers because we know what we need. And if they can't give us what we need, we're not going to specify it. And the entry into that door, one means of entry into that door is through support of the specifying community. And a great way to do that is to be an LIRC member and be part of the IALD.
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, the point that I was like, the 3-part point, which is so ridiculous, but it's like there is a relationship with standards organizations. That is, the participation there isn't totally altruistic. That is also about having an influence and being a thought leader and understanding exactly what is coming through the regulatory framework. And as IALD starts to change the way in which we're structured, become more open, those relationships, we will have to speak to our partners and understand what it is they want. One thing that we're very clear on, though, and I say this to every company that we engage with, or even organizations that we engage with, is we're interested in relationships of value, right? If you're obligated to spend money with us, that's going to be cut real quick, right? The next round of like, we need to make cuts, the obligation is going to be the first to be cut. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an environment whereby, and I'm going to go back to the unsexy things, but like the new website, for example, allows LIRC members to connect with IALD members and participate in forums, for example. That's the direct connection to your customer, your specifier. It's also about getting feedback on your products. There's a whole way that can become useful. And our thing is, we don't want to just receive donations. The trust is a different story. They do want donations. But IALD, there is no point in just receiving cash without them getting reciprocal benefit. Because often what happens is, and particularly in large organizations, the CEO doesn't know us, doesn't necessarily know what we do. The people underneath who are supporting the organizations are saying, this is something that we really should do. And if they can't justify that, we're not going to get the funding. And the same thing that we're doing with the individual members is, and LIRC is really our vehicle for this, but we are open to ideas and suggestions and ways of working. If people have got a particular idea that they want and they think this is the way that you could add a huge amount of value, then let us know. Like, we want to be a place where people can feel welcome and can get benefit. That's individuals and organizations.
It doesn't mean we can do everything.
It doesn't, but it's a more open dialogue than it's ever been.
So the direct value that sponsors and partners get from an organization when they give money to it, that is largely based on membership, which is, we'll call a customer of theirs, is a direct connection with them. That's fantastic. It's a great thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And what's even cooler is the IALD said, and we're not just going to put your name on a poster. We're actually going to create an organization within our organization for that. The IALD has proven that it knows how to create an organization within an organization. There's no reason you couldn't keep going. Is there anything else you want to nail before we move to the conclusion part of this?
That because of being involved with the IALD, I've gotten to go to Australia. I've gotten to go to Japan. I've gotten, to go to Europe all over. I've met people that I want to spend time after the sessions, like I said before, having a beer with or a glass of something with, just talking for hours on end. Beyond the value that I get from being part of an association that has to do with what I'm passionate about, volunteering within it, serving back to it, has multifold come back to give me opportunities that I would never have had otherwise. I just cannot be more grateful, and that translates into wanting to give back into it. Oh dear.
No, I was just like, can I pick up on something that Sam said, which was teeing up for the LIRC has been a space where we've created a space within the organization. I would love in the future to have some of the other groups feel like they could be at home in the IALD and work towards their missions within that structure. I have no idea what that needs to look like to work for them, but I do think that a more cohesive voice outwardly and to the industry would be helpful. So this is like an open call. Like if you are in one of those organizations and you think that should happen, like really, let's start that conversation.
We want you.
Yeah.
The more we grow, the more resilient we are, the more power we have. The
more voices we have, the stronger it is.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's ultimately
why we need to grow. We need to include as many people as possible, because actually united is the only way that we will achieve what we want to achieve.
If you think about the purpose of a nonprofit, in this case, the IALD, it all comes back to membership. It all comes back to the value that the members receive and then funding that engine. There's a catch-22 there, right? You can call it a chicken and egg. There's a lot of things that happen there, but for an organization that maybe isn't old, but not entirely young anymore, where do you feel like you see it going? And then compare that to where you want it to go in your own heart.
I would like to see IALD grow into an organization that is known as being the place to go if you want information on lighting, or you want to be part of that profession, or you need information about that profession, and it becomes like the authority. Not like, it becomes the authority. So that you just sort of mentioned member value and it about being about connection. It's also about the intellectual
brain trust.
I didn't want to use that word, but yeah.
Sorry.
Brain trust. I mean, it really is. It's like if you want an answer, and I think one of our members put it really succinctly, which was wherever you're working in the world, you're often taking complex situations, and lighting designers currently are often the ones brought in to solve problems. It sits between the code guidance and the reality of the building and all of those other things, and they're responsible for coming up with the unique or original way of solving those problems. So one of the biggest things that we have to offer is our membership have got incredible experience, and that isn't valueless.
No.
Right? That has a lot of value to it. And so that's also about us being able to leverage that better, to share that amongst other people. But it's also, to Andrea's point, of the discussion after the sessions is not frivolous discussion. It's actually about, how did you solve that problem, or how did you come up with a unique problem?
Or what talk can we do next year?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that goes on. The other thing I think that's important in thinking about, the future of the IALD, what it needs to look like, is the outreach to peripheral organizations, because we spend so much time talking amongst ourselves, which is great, but we all know why we're here. And, we're starting to have more and more agreements and partnerships and friendships with organizations that don't necessarily know what we do completely. For me, when I think about the IALD and what 10 years, 20 years, 30 years looks like down the road, it's, that the world understands why it's so important to have an association full of members that care about humans and living experience, through the power of light. I think it would be great if people's eyes didn't glaze over when I say I'm an architectural lighting designer. I would love it. My daughter-in-law is a lawyer, and she was doing, I think, practice questions for the bar. It wasn't even for that. It was a test within law school. And the test question, honest to goodness, was something to the effect of, a lighting designer, something, something, something. And in parentheses, it said, yes, this really is a profession. So for me, I would really love it if that never happens again. We want to be a valued member of the design team at the table, not a curiosity, not a means to an end. We sit as part of a team. We're brought in sometimes to solve problems. Sometimes we get to be at the beginning of the creative process and, all the things that come with that. But sometimes we really are looked upon as almost an adversary because other parts of the design team see themselves as able to do lighting design. And at a fundamental level, perhaps they are. But the things that they don't know are about the psychological, the physiological, all of the things that lighting designers have to know to do their jobs properly. We need strength. We need to have the kind of association that advocates for the lighting designer, period.
This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much to both of you, sincerely. I know you're busier than heck right now. I know that there's a lot going on around this. I know you're only going to talk about this topic for the next 4 days. So this couldn't be a better way to prime the case. But if people aren't here, if they listen to this and they want to give you an idea, they want to follow up with you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can always email me. I am accessible, because what's going to happen is I'm going to listen to what they have to say. I'm going to have a conversation with Christopher, and then we move forward. Again, we can't do everything, but I'm looking for trends. If I hear the same thing over and over and over again, we need this is a problem, this is whatever.
IALD at IALD.org.
You can find Christopher and Andrea's information on the IALD website. We'll also link to it in our show notes. Thank you both so much. Enjoy your time in what I believe now is sunny San Diego, because it's after 2:00. Enjoy. I hear there's tequila tasting. There's a cocktail party tonight. If you're listening to this and you've never been able to enjoy an Enlighten Americas conference, check it out. If you're young, there's a program through the IALD Education Trust you can apply to, and you can actually get sponsored. Speaking of sponsorships,
LARC as well.
And LARC
and
for emerging
LARC
professionals.
members. So as an emerging professional, your cost can be paid to come here. It's an incredible experience. It's an incredible community, and it seeks to grow. And the only way that happens is if you decide to show up and join. Andrea, Christopher, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Enjoy it.
Thank you for supporting us.
Heck yeah. Go lighting.
Go team.
Be brilliant, stay bold.
I like it.
Keep doing it. Hey, it's Sam. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Light Pod. In case you didn't know, this entire episode was actually also produced with a video attached to it. So make sure wherever you listen to this, you think about watching it next time. It's amazing the connection you'll have when you not only listen, but you watch the brilliant minds who join us to celebrate the people, the process, and the product behind design. Until the next episode, stay brilliant, be bold, and never let your inspiration go. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.